You may have done everything you thought you were supposed to do. You gave them space. You stayed patient. You tried to understand their behavior. You carefully avoided saying too much or asking for too much. Yet somehow, every time the connection starts feeling deeper, they seem to disappear behind that same emotional wall. And then you're left asking yourself, what did I do wrong? But what if the answer is nothing? What if the one thing you've been afraid to say because you didn't want to disturb the relationship is actually the boundary that could change the entire dynamic? There is one boundary that matters here. And when you communicate it from the right place, it can create something an avoidant person rarely experiences in relationships: the feeling that they can be close to someone without losing themselves. That feeling can completely change how they experience you. Before we go deeper, I want you to comment the word anchor, just that one word, because the idea we're discussing today is about becoming emotionally grounded instead of constantly being pulled around by someone else's distance. If this speaks to what you've been experiencing, leave that word below. Now, to understand why this boundary matters, you first have to understand what may be happening beneath avoidant behavior. Someone with avoidant attachment usually didn't simply decide one day that relationships weren't important. This pattern often develops over years, especially when early experiences taught them that emotional closeness came with a cost. Maybe their needs were dismissed. Maybe affection felt overwhelming or intrusive. Maybe depending on someone resulted in disappointment. Or perhaps they learned that having strong emotional needs meant losing their independence. Eventually, their nervous system can begin connecting intimacy with danger. Closeness can start to feel like being trapped. Needing someone can feel like surrendering control. Depending on another person can feel like giving away part of their identity. So, when an adult relationship begins becoming emotionally intense, their nervous system may react before their conscious mind even understands what is happening. They create distance. They become quieter. They suddenly seem busy. They may start focusing on your flaws or questioning whether the relationship is right. They may act as though their feelings changed overnight. But sometimes, what changed wasn't their feelings for you. Their sense of emotional threat changed. And when that happens, many people make the exact mistake that reinforces the cycle. They chase. They send more messages. They explain themselves repeatedly. They try harder to prove how much they care. They become increasingly available. They suppress their own needs because they're terrified that asking for more will push the avoidant person even farther away. Eventually, they begin shrinking themselves just to keep the connection alive. And that is where the dynamic becomes unhealthy. Because when you constantly abandon your own needs to accommodate another person's distance, you are no longer showing secure love. You are showing that you will tolerate almost anything just to avoid losing them. And ironically, that can make the relationship feel even less safe. The boundary is simple. It isn't about controlling them. It isn't about threatening them. It isn't about forcing them to communicate on your schedule. It is a boundary about what you are willing to participate in. It sounds like this: I care about you, but I cannot continue investing in a relationship where I consistently feel that you are unavailable to me. That is the boundary. But the words themselves are not the most important part. What matters is whether you genuinely mean them. You don't say it angrily. You don't use it to scare them into chasing you. You don't announce that you're leaving every time they pull away. You simply stop abandoning yourself. You continue living your life. You maintain your standards. You protect your emotional energy. You allow them to have their space without allowing their distance to determine your entire emotional state. And something important changes. For perhaps the first time, the avoidant person encounters someone who can love deeply without becoming dependent on their approval. Someone who can care without chasing. someone who can remain connected to themselves even when the other person becomes distant. That can feel completely unfamiliar to someone whose nervous system associates intimacy with losing freedom.
Because now they are no longer experiencing a relationship where one person gets closer while the other desperately tries to escape. Instead, they are seeing a person who says, in effect, "I want you, but I will not lose myself trying to keep you." That communicates strength without aggression. It communicates care without desperation. And most importantly, it demonstrates that closeness does not automatically mean losing yourself. When you stop chasing and genuinely return your attention to your own life, something else happens too. The avoidant person no longer has your constant pursuit, creating the emotional distance for them. They have to sit with their own feelings. They may begin noticing your absence. They may start recognizing what your presence actually meant. They may become more curious about the connection because you're no longer constantly trying to pull them toward you. But remember, the goal of the boundary isn't to manipulate them into coming back. The goal is to stop abandoning yourself. If they move closer, let it be because they genuinely choose to. If they remain distant, your boundary still protects you. Because real emotional security begins when you can say, "I care about this person, but I will not disappear from my own life just to keep them." That is the kind of groundedness an avoidant person may find deeply unfamiliar. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do for a relationship is stop trying to hold it together by yourself. When you stop chasing, something changes in the dynamic. There is no longer constant pursuit pushing them toward greater distance. They are left alone with the space they created, and instead of immediately feeling relieved by your absence, they may begin to experience what your absence actually means. This is where the dynamic can shift.
But most people never reach this point, because the moment the avoidant person becomes distant, they panic and start pursuing again. They cannot tolerate the uncertainty, so they send another message, make another call, explain themselves again, or try to restore the connection immediately. And the cycle starts over. They withdraw, you chase. They feel pressured, they retreat further. You become more anxious. Eventually, one person becomes exhausted enough to walk away. But there is something extremely important you need to understand. This boundary is not a trick designed to make an avoidant person chase you. It is not a psychological game. It is not a technique for winning them back. And if you're secretly pulling away because you expect them to panic and come running toward you, you're still operating from the same anxious cycle.
An avoidant person can often sense when someone's behavior is being performed rather than genuinely felt. Many people with avoidant tendencies became highly sensitive to emotional tension while growing up. They learned to observe people's moods, reactions, and unspoken feelings because understanding the emotional environment around them helped them feel safe. So, if your distance is calculated, they may sense that something is happening beneath the surface. And instead of creating safety, it can reinforce their belief that relationships involve pressure, hidden expectations, and emotional games. The only boundary that truly matters is the one you actually mean. It comes from deciding that you are no longer willing to pour your emotional energy into someone who repeatedly demonstrates that they cannot meet you halfway. It comes from recognizing that constantly pursuing someone hasn't created the relationship you want. And it comes from understanding that you deserve a connection where basic affection, communication, and presence don't have to be begged for. That kind of boundary feels completely different. There is no bitterness behind it, no punishment, no attempt to make them jealous, no dramatic announcement. You are simply choosing yourself. And ironically, that is often the most powerful shift you can make when you're involved with someone who tends to pull away. Think about what happens in real life. You notice the change. Their messages become shorter. Their enthusiasm disappears. They seem less emotionally available. They become vague,
distant or unusually irritable. Your first instinct may be to fix everything.
You want to ask what happened. You want reassurance. You want to bring back the version of them who was warm and connected before. But instead of chasing, you pause, not to punish them, not to play unavailable. You pause because you recognize that pursuing someone while they're actively withdrawing usually creates even more pressure. So you take all that energy you would have spent checking your phone, analyzing their messages, sending follow-ups, or trying to repair the connection, and you bring it back into your own life. You call someone you trust, you exercise, you work, you focus on something you've been neglecting. You spend time doing things that remind you who you are outside this relationship. Most importantly, you allow yourself to feel the fear without allowing that fear to control your behavior. You can be afraid of losing someone without immediately trying to prevent the loss. And something begins changing inside you. You realize you can survive the uncertainty. You realize you can keep yourself company. You realize that their withdrawal does not have to become your emotional emergency. That is how your own attachment pattern begins to change. Meanwhile, the other person may experience the distance differently too. Usually when they pull away, your pursuit fills the empty space. They create distance and you immediately move toward them. But this time, you don't. The silence remains. And that silence can begin carrying a different emotional meaning. Instead of simply feeling like relief from pressure, it can start feeling like the absence of someone who mattered. They may begin wondering why your reaction is different. Why aren't you chasing? Why doesn't your entire emotional world seem to revolve around getting them back? And that can create a completely different kind of reflection.
But we need to be honest about something. Stopping the chase does not guarantee that an avoidant person will return. It doesn't magically make someone emotionally available. It doesn't guarantee that they will suddenly become ready for commitment or do the work required for a healthy relationship. Some people will simply let the connection go. And if that happens, it doesn't automatically mean your boundary failed. It may simply reveal the truth about their current capacity. That truth can hurt terribly, but it is still valuable information. Because you don't need a relationship where you have to constantly convince someone to choose you.
And if someone genuinely does return and begins making healthier choices, the important part isn't that your absence somehow manipulated them into coming back. The important part is what they discovered. They saw that you could love them without losing yourself. They saw that your affection wasn't desperation. They saw that you could care deeply while still maintaining your identity, standards, and emotional stability. And that creates a different model of intimacy. Instead of, if I get close, I'm going to lose myself, they may begin experiencing, I can be close to this person and still remain myself. That is a powerful difference. Healthy intimacy doesn't require one person to disappear so the other can feel safe. It allows two people to remain separate individuals while still being deeply connected. And this is where your own healing becomes essential.
You cannot genuinely hold this boundary if underneath it you're secretly hoping it will force them to change. You cannot hold it from a place of accumulated anger while pretending you're completely calm. And you cannot use self-respect as a disguise for resentment. A real boundary comes from somewhere quieter. It comes from reaching a point where you can honestly say, if choosing myself means I lose this relationship, then I will accept that loss. Not because you don't care, but because you understand that being with someone is not worth abandoning yourself. And reaching that point requires you to look at your own patterns.
Why are you so drawn toward someone who keeps creating distance? Why does their withdrawal make you want them even more? Why does inconsistency sometimes feel more emotionally intense than consistency? For some people, this isn't entirely about the current relationship.
It may connect to something much older. If you grew up learning that love had to be earned, that attention could disappear without warning, or that you had to become more pleasing, more useful, or more perfect to keep someone close, an emotionally unavailable partner can activate those old instincts. You chase because some part of you still believes that if you just try harder, this time the person will finally stay. And that's why this boundary isn't only about the avoidant person. It is also about ending that pattern within yourself. It is choosing not to recreate an old emotional story with a new person.
That is the deeper transformation. Because once you stop believing that unavailable love is something you have to earn, your attractions begin to change. People who once seemed incredibly exciting because they were difficult to reach may start feeling draining. And people who are consistent, warm, emotionally present, and dependable may begin feeling much safer and more appealing. Your nervous system starts learning that peace is not boredom, consistency is not lack of chemistry, and love does not have to hurt to feel real. Finally, understand what this boundary is not. It is not threatening to leave every time they pull away. It is not making dramatic promises you don't intend to keep. And it is certainly not saying, "I'm done," simply to see whether they'll panic and chase you. Empty ultimatums create instability. If you repeatedly threaten to leave and then immediately return, you teach the other person that your words don't necessarily reflect your actual decisions, and that can make the relationship feel even more unpredictable.
A genuine boundary is different. You don't threaten. You don't manipulate. You don't perform strength. You simply decide what you will and will not participate in, and then you live according to that decision. That is where your power actually begins. Only promise what you are genuinely prepared to follow through on. If you tell someone, "I'm going to stop reaching out," while you're pulling away, then be prepared to honor that decision. If you know you cannot do it yet, don't make the statement. Give yourself time until your actions can support your words. Because a boundary that you constantly break eventually stops being a boundary.
And there is another distinction you need to understand.
Stepping back is not the same thing as giving someone the silent treatment. Those two behaviors may look similar from the outside, but emotionally, they come from completely different places. One says, "I need to bring my attention back to myself." The other says, "I want you to suffer because you hurt me." One is self-respect. The other is an attempt to control someone's reaction. Even if an avoidant person cannot explain the difference, they may sense it. When silence is being used as punishment, it carries tension, resentment, and an expectation that the other person should eventually give in. That can make them feel even more threatened and defensive. But when you genuinely redirect your attention toward your own life, there is no performance behind it. You are simply no longer chasing. And that doesn't mean you have to become cold.
You don't need to suddenly act indifferent. You don't need to stop caring. You don't have to pretend that their behavior doesn't affect you. You can still be kind. You can still be warm. You can still have love for them. The difference is that you stop spending all of your active emotional energy trying to pull them toward you. You keep your heart open, but you stop abandoning yourself to reach someone who isn't currently reaching back. Think of it as bringing your energy home. You're not closing your heart. You're simply no longer leaving yourself behind while waiting for someone else to decide whether they want to show up. And this doesn't have to be permanent. A boundary isn't a prison sentence. It isn't a decision that you can never reconsider. It is simply a way of stepping out of the unhealthy pattern long enough for reality to become visible. Once you stop chasing, one of two things becomes clearer. They may recognize your absence, reflect on what they actually feel, and begin moving toward you with more consistent effort. Or they may continue choosing distance. Both outcomes give you something you didn't have before: clarity. And even if one outcome breaks your heart, Clarity is still healthier than spending months or years trapped in uncertainty, constantly wondering what you need to do differently to make someone stay. At least now, you know. And knowing allows you to move forward. So if there is one thing I want you to take away from everything we've discussed, let it be this. You are not inherently the problem. Your desire for emotional closeness isn't a weakness. Wanting communication, affection, consistency, and mutual effort doesn't make you needy. Those are normal human needs. The problem begins when you keep trying to pour all of those needs into a relationship that repeatedly gives you nowhere to place them, and then turn around and blame yourself when you still feel empty. The avoidant person isn't necessarily a villain either. They may be someone whose emotional defenses were built for reasons they didn't choose. Their nervous system may have learned that distance provides safety, even when that distance eventually hurts the people they care about. That deserves understanding. But understanding someone does not mean sacrificing yourself for them. You can recognize someone's wounds without volunteering to be wounded indefinitely. You can understand why they pull away and still decide that being repeatedly pushed away isn't acceptable for you. You can care about what happened to them while protecting yourself from what their unresolved patterns are doing to you. Both truths can exist together. You can say,
I understand why you protect yourself this way. I care about you. I don't need you to be perfect. But I also cannot keep shrinking myself while you decide whether you're willing to meet me. That is the heart of the boundary. And its greatest power isn't that it guarantees someone will come back. It doesn't. Its greatest power is that it guarantees you won't lose yourself while waiting to find out. You stop disappearing inside the relationship. You stop measuring your worth by their availability. You stop abandoning your own needs every time they create distance. You learn how to stand beside yourself, even when someone else cannot stand beside you.
and that is how the cycle begins to break. So take a breath and let this settle. You don't have to master it overnight. You don't have to become perfectly secure tomorrow. Start with one moment. One time when you feel the urge to chase, pause. One time when you want to send another message just to relieve your anxiety, wait. One time when you feel tempted to abandon your own needs just to keep someone close, choose yourself instead. Every one of those choices teaches your nervous system something new. You are showing yourself that you can tolerate uncertainty. You can survive someone's distance. You can love someone without losing yourself inside the relationship.
And as that becomes more natural, your entire understanding of love can begin to change. You may become less attracted to people who constantly keep you guessing. You may start recognizing the difference between emotional intensity and genuine connection. You may discover that consistency isn't boring, it is safe. And whether the person in your life eventually becomes capable of doing the work required to build something healthier, or whether your future leads you towards someone entirely different, you will be in a better place, because you will no longer be waiting for someone else to choose you before you decide that you are worth choosing. You will have already chosen yourself. And once you do that, everything begins to change.